Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Fabulous. Thank you for joining us here at Forbes Library in the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum on this beautiful evening. My name is Priya Cherry. I'm the head of adult services here at Forbes. I see some familiar faces, and I'm glad to see you back, and some new ones to me as well. So welcome. Before we get started, some very quick housekeeping bits. If you need a restroom or a water fountain, it's through the art gallery into the arts and music department and to the left. Exits through the art gallery and to the right. We are live streaming tonight's event. So as I mentioned, those of you in the front row, you might get the tips of the back of your head, but that's okay. Just so you know, anything spoken into the microphone gets on the live stream, and conversely, anything that is not spoken into the microphone does not get on the live stream. So during Q&A, if you would like your question heard by folks listening either tonight or on the recording afterward, wait until I bring you the microphone, or if you would really not like your question heard, speak it to our presenters and they will summarize, just whatever your comfort level is. Programming here at Forbes Library is supported by the Friends of Forbes Library, who support programming for all ages year-round. So if you would like to continue supporting the good work that they do, supporting us, please ask me about it afterward. Happy to help you get involved. Welcome, come on in. And with that, I will be turning the lights off so we can see our presentation. But most of the lights in the back will be on, so just be careful if you get up, because it might be a little dark back there. I'm going to pass it on to our authors for tonight. It's going to be an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Many gratitudes. First to Priya. First to Priya for making this all possible and doing all the technical things for me in 2 minutes. And telling me to use the microphone. Is it on? Can you hear the microphone? Sounds like it's on there. And it'll pick up. Oh, maybe it'll be on for the live stream. That's what you mean. Okay. So I'll pretend it's doing it for you too. So thanks to Priya. Thanks to all of you who came out on this rather chilly night. And a great appreciation for my co-author. And his son is here tonight too, which is special, named after each other. And we're going to get started, jump right in. I want to talk to you, first of all, about the title of this book, In Defiance. Where did that come from? Some of you may be familiar with a man named Bryan Stevenson. He has numerous credits to his amazing list of accomplishments, including the Equal Justice Initiative, a museum to lynching, Black history, the book that he wrote called Just Mercy, about getting men off death row, black men off death row, and the film that was made of the book, which is phenomenal. And he also appears in a book called Learning from the Germans, Race and the Memory of Evil by Susan Neiman. And he's quoted in that book saying this: "You should be proud of those Southerners in Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama who argued in the 1850s that slavery was wrong. There were white Southerners in the 1920s who tried to stop lynchings, and you don't know their names. The fact that we don't know their names says everything we need to know." And he goes on to say this, which is where the title comes from: "We can actually then claim a heritage rooted in courage and in defiance of what is easy and preferring what is right. We can make that the norm we want to celebrate as our Southern, and I would say American history and heritage and culture." And as you would all agree with me, we're not going in that direction right now, but that's a big reason why we want the book to be in the world right now. So that's where the title comes from, and Dr. Shabazz will tell you about the subtitle.
Good evening, everyone, and again, thanks for being here. The subtitle, well, just a moment, a little additional thing on the title. Tom and I were interviewed today for a woman named Tinky that's doing a review of the book, and we visited on this, and I reminded how when Tom first proposed this title, it made me think of the old movie, The Defiant Ones, with Sidney Poitier and Tom Curtis playing a black, Tony Curtis playing a black prisoner and a white prisoner who are chained together. and they are endeavoring through the whole movie to be free, to get themselves out of prison and be free. But along the way, they have their own individual prejudices and issues and racism, but they are forced to kind of confront them and confront the problem in order to work together to be free. So it just kind of reminded me of that when we thought of In Defiance, that old movie.
We never had a chain between us. We did
No. But I like the association myself, at least, with Sidney Poitier. But on the subtitle, the 20 Abolitionists, the abolition movement is often anchored with academic historians in what's known as the Age of Reform. The United States, as industrial capitalism has fully taken off, as a number of things are colliding to make people begin to want to reform and think about, even think in very messianic terms, that the end of the world was coming, and in the 1820s, 1830s. It was a time of driven by great reform movements. In literature, we think of the transcendentalists, the people like Thoreau and Emerson and others who were looking at the changes that were happening in society due to industrialization and other things. And within all of that, we have the reform movement known as abolitionism that emerges. And so that's kind of the tight little period between the 1820s or so and 1860 is sort of the period in which we typically think of abolitionism. Well, in this book, we go back to the 1600s. We got people in there whose lives we're telling their stories even after the Civil War is over and slavery is at least constitutionally abolished. And so we don't restrict ourselves to that sort of traditional academic notion of abolitionism. Truth be told, slavery in this country was really moving toward extinction up until a certain invention came along. What was the invention? The cotton gin. Eli Whitney, right down the street there in Yale, goes down south to be a tutor and sees what's going on and talks to the enslaved people and kind of works with them to come up with this gin, this piece of technology. That's why we got to pay attention to AI too, because technology can come up and really change our lives in some terrible ways, because once that cotton gin was able to clean the cotton fibers so much more quickly and make the cotton crop cheaper to produce here in the U.S., where it could compete on the market against cotton from India and cotton from Egypt and elsewhere, that then made the institution of slavery immensely profitable once again. And that's where then people started coming in saying, oh no, we thought this thing was going into extinction. We thought we were stopping this. By the Constitution, we got out of the slave trade at 1808. What are we doing getting back involved with this slavery thing so much, right? And having the whole second Middle Passage in terms of the Deep South buying enslaved people from Virginia and from the states where cotton had kind of played out the soil. It wasn't even profitable to grow it very much in the Upper South. So now it's down in the Deep South, and they're buying the slaves from the plantations in Virginia and North Carolina and so on. So, it becomes something to look at, to see this. But we expand the definition of abolitionism to look at people by virtue of their refusing this thing called slavery, okay? And how they contribute to both building a movement, yes, but more importantly, that building a certain idea of refusing this whole exploitation of human beings, of man by man, woman by woman, based upon its profitability. And so for us, it felt important to have this more expansive view, to take the 20 people we take in this book, black and white, which was important for us too. We wanted to have a clear idea that white people are refusing this institution too. And Tom will pick up with more on some of those.
Thanks. I want to talk about another motivating force. We wrote the preface in two voices. and the conclusion in two voices. This is my voice. You just got to hear Shabazz's voice as well. So there was another motivating factor that was affirmed in a visit to the River Road African American Museum in Donaldson, Louisiana in 1993. Kathy Hambrick, the museum's founder and curator, had been trying for the past 25 years to inform people about the history of African American contributors to American culture, which is the name of the unit I taught for 3 months at the campus school for 30 years, who had been forgotten. When she visited plantations along the Mississippi River in the early 1990s, she discovered that enslaved people were still referred to as servants. That happened when I visited my son at Tulane, so I could confirm that. And it happened at every plantation she went to. And she was a black woman who grew up there. She told me that one night, when I visited the museum, she had a vision of her ancestors floating on a barge on the Mississippi River, calling out to her, "Don't let them forget us." She was both appalled at the plantation tours and inspired by her vision, and subsequently founded the museum to honor those who came before. And she's kept track of and records of both the people who they could document on the plantations and all the people who've come to the museum who were their descendants. She told me of an African proverb that clarified her quest and then adorned my bulletin board from the first day of school to the last for years after I met her. Until the lion tells the tale, tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter. We wanted this book to be the lion telling the tale. And that was our goal and purpose, one of them, in writing the book. So Shabazz, do you want to talk a little bit about?
One of the lionesses that we felt really important to honor. And to be honest, I didn't know about this figure until a man named Ta-Nehisi Coates, a wonderful writer, Ta-Nehisi Coates, published this essay about the case for reparations in the Atlantic Monthly. And he mentions, just in a paragraph, it wasn't a whole lot of information, this woman in Massachusetts that petitioned in 1783 for reparations. And that was important for us because I had gotten involved, and Tom has been involved, and we met people that are also here, like Michelle Miller and Jeff Gold and Mattia Kramer and others, to trying to raise up this idea of reparations in our time, because the great Coolidges and so many others on down, from Lincoln on down, they did not grapple with this question. I really honestly believe we might have gotten further along on it under Lincoln if he hadn't been assassinated. Not that, to glorify him in all aspects, but I think he realized something more had to be done, which is part of the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau, which was designed to start a process of reparations. And but then, as soon as he was assassinated, the Johnson that comes in after him vetoes it, and they have to override the veto, and everything started to contract. The whole idea of reparations began to evaporate. So, but we've been active on that. We feel it's been the way to go in terms of social policy to address the harms of slavery. But an inspiration for us is Belinda, and we like to say Belinda X, because as you can see here in a facsimile of one of the petitions, this isn't the 1783 one that we include. This is a picture of a 1788, because she kept the petitions going. And I have to say, and she did get a little bit of money. This is a woman who was taken from Africa as a child, as we tell the story here, from what today would be called Ghana, near the Volta River. And she's ripped out the arms of her mother and father by people with faces that look like the moon. She comes over here, works her entire life, and until the American Revolution comes, by this family, a man named Isaac Royal, who stayed loyal to the crown. He did not go with the Adams and the Jeffersons and the Washingtons and go against the crown. He stays with the crown, so it becomes uncomfortable for him to stay, and he leaves. And his land and the enslaved people that he claimed as property were all left. And so the people, they didn't try to sell them off as property. They became free, but they had no money. They had no savings, no pension. They'd never earned any wages. And so Belinda, who's now 70 years old at the time of the first petition, she's like, look, I've got a daughter with special needs. She can't work. I'm no longer of working age. I can't really work anymore, and I need to take care of the daughter. Can you break me off a little bit of this property of Isaac Royal that you're selling to give, me as a pension that I can live, that we can survive, not have to go into the almshouse or be out on the street begging? And they actually listened and gave a small amount to her. Most of the money, though, from the sale of his property in Medford, Massachusetts, went to none other than Harvard University, helped to fund the creation of the Harvard Law School. So again, we thought it an important chapter to bring that up, and we included in the appendix her own words of 1783 reparations petition that was written by others. She was helped by people like Prince Hall, founder of the Masonic Order, the Prince Hall Masons. He had to go all the way to England to get permission to create to start the Prince Hall Masons. White Masons wouldn't let blacks in, free blacks in. They were like, no. So they went all the way to England, learned the mysteries, was accepted in the Masonic Order, and given permission to go back, and he created the first Mother Lodge in Boston, and then it has spread all over the United States, Black Masons. We have them in Springfield. If you ever go to different Black history events, they come out with their little aprons on, and then the little hats and their little procession, and they're throwing little signals that, unless you're a Mason, you don't know that they're throwing these little signals at you. But so someone like a Prince Hall and David Walker, these are people that helped her to put in words some of her desire for reparations. The face of your petitioner is now marked with the furrows of time, and her frame feebly bending under the oppression of years, while she, by the laws of the land, is denied the enjoyment of one morsel of that immense wealth, a part whereof hath been accumulated by her own industry, and the whole augmented by her servitude. Wherefore, casting herself at the feet of your honors, as to a body of men formed for the extirpation of vassalage, for the reward of virtue, and the just return of honest industry, she prays that such allowance may be made out of the estate of Colonel Royal, as will prevent her and her more infirm daughter from misery in the greatest extreme, and scatter comfort over the short and downward path of their lives. And she will ever pray. Boston, 14th of February, 1783, the mark of Belinda with the X.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about the cover of the book, because a lot went into the cover. Some of you have it in front of you. Here's most of it. It didn't make, the picture of it couldn't encompass the entire cover, so I want to share a few things from it. First of all, there are 7 of the people, 7 of the 20. We can't get a picture of Belinda, 1780s. We don't have a picture of the person who we're representing with this butterfly. And the butterfly does not appear there, but it's very much on the cover. And that's because Sarah Mapps Douglas, who is chapter 3, the photograph that we found of her, because she was during a time when photography enabled people to have their photo taken, was not her. She was misidentified. I found her story in an article by a black journalist named Herb Boyd, who wrote one of the blurbs, who writes for the Amsterdam News in New York City. And I had to go back to him and tell him that we had gone through the authentication process, and that wasn't her. It was another abolitionist from the Library of Congress. The cool part about the butterfly, though, is Sarah Mapps Douglas, in addition to being an extraordinary abolitionist, was the first black woman to have any of her artwork published in a book. And that was the artwork. And these flowers are hers as well. Those are in there. I want to take you down to the top of the house. In the book, it's the entire house. That's where in 1688, this man, Francis Pastorius, was one of the 4 signers of the first ever anti-slavery petition for Quakers in that house. The house is gone. What's not gone is the desk. And I have a fantasy, which I'm trying to bring to reality. Dr. Shabazz and I going down there, we've made contact, and sitting next to that desk where that petition was signed and doing a presentation. But that desk has really great resonance for me and for all of us, really. And the house is gone. There's also a picture, not on the slide, of an oriole. What is an oriole doing on the cover of a book about abolitionists? And that's because we tried to portray them in their fullness as people. They weren't just abolitionists. And Graceanna Lewis was a renowned ornithologist, and that's the Graceanna oriole, named after her. Sadly, when I read about her life and portrayed her, she never got with the program of evolution, and she lost a lot of credibility because of it. There's another person, this person, speaking of controversial figures, Jane Swisshelm, self-portrait, who also had clay feet. And if and when you read the book, you'll see that she was an incredible feminist way before her time, journalist, first woman in Congress to report about what happened, and she was there for some of the leading up to the Civil War atrocities. And she also, though, was really wrong about Native Americans. And we write about it. We didn't skimp. We didn't say, the choices were leave her out. I didn't think that was right. Or pretend that didn't happen. No, we decided to tell the truth. And that's what this book intends to be a voice to do. So the person I want to talk about is the greatest ever 4'10" Quaker, Benjamin Lay. Some of you may have heard of him. He should be having a statue. He lived in a cave for a while. He was extraordinary. Here's how he invented guerrilla theater in 1738. The incident took place in Burlington, New Jersey in 1738. He entered the Philadelphia Quaker yearly meeting dressed as a soldier. Carrying a sword and a Bible concealed beneath his overcoat, he delivered a long and impassioned speech describing the horrors of enslavement. "Oh, all you Negro masters who are contentedly holding your fellow creatures in a state of slavery during life, well knowing the cruel sufferings those innocent captives undergo, especially you who profess to do unto all men as ye would they should do unto you, you might as well throw off this plain coat as I do." And just as he arrived at the climax of the oration, he took off his coat, held the Bible in one hand, and pierced it with his sword. Inside the Bible, he had placed a rubber bag filled with bright red pokeberry juice. The juice splattered those sitting close by, and he continued to speak. "It would be as justifiable in the sight of the Almighty, who beholds and respects all nations and colors of men with an equal regard, if you should thrust a sword through their hearts as I do through this." That was guerrilla theater to the max, in my estimation. 1738, 4'10", and didn't stop there. He would stand in front of a meeting in the winter with his feet bare in the snow. And as people would walk in, he'd said, "This is the kind of suffering you're causing." And there were other examples. Small man with an enormous heart, an enormous soul for black people. He also wrote a book. And it was edited by another Benjamin you may have heard of, Benjamin Franklin. They became intimate friends. The book was called All Slave Keepers That Keep the Innocent in Bondage, 1738. And Franklin edited it to make it even better. The goal in writing it was to expose the great and grave contradiction between the beliefs and actions of too many of his fellow Quakers, and to undo, quote, "the great hypocrisy at the heart of the American self-image." Sound like a quote we could be using today? And then the last thing about him. Nowadays, Benjamin Lay still remains an obscure figure, and I will say that they just did a play about Benjamin in Philadelphia. I had hoped we could get down in time to hawk the book. as people were walking into the play. That didn't happen. A friend of mine saw it and said it was really well done. But he should be remembered as one of the few Americans of his generation that recognized and refused to compromise with the evil that lay at the heart of their society. He made his own life into a parable. He knew that people would tell stories of the apparently crazy things he did. And he knew that through this, the moral lessons he was teaching would spread. And while he preached a love for all mankind, he recognized that there was no contradiction between that and refusing to compromise with those who drew their wealth from human suffering. He was, in many ways, a man ahead of his time, but in many other ways, he was exactly the man his time needed. And the world today would be a worse place if he had not been in it. For that, we should be grateful. Benjamin Lay. And that's just 2 of the 20, and now you're going to hear about another.
So we entitled the chapter on Henry Highland Garnet, Before Malcolm X. And a lot of times, many of us think of Malcolm X in this manner of being this outstanding orator and radical, and but we had equally outstanding orders and radicalism by abolitionists in the 19th century, and Henry Highland Garnet is among the greatest of them. He was one of 6 sons, and he was part of a family that had been kind of told that when the massa would die, that they would be set free, and that day came and they weren't. They were passed down in a deed and a will to some other descendants, and so they felt really betrayed by it. But they kept quiet and they just waited for an opportunity to, as an entire family, leave. It says in 1824, Colonel Spencer, who'd never married, died and left his estate to his brother Isaac and numerous nephews. The human beings that the colonel once enslaved now became the property of his heirs. In the face of impending change, George called a meeting of the family, and a plan to seek freedom in the North was born. It took subterfuge to obtain permission to attend a funeral 11 miles away and to take that as a chance to escape.
Sorry to interrupt. The swap mics with you. This one's a little crackly. I'm going to go over your head.
Mm-hmm. And so they took that opportunity under the cloak of going to this wedding in a covered wagon, the whole family, with Henry at that point 9 years old. And so together with his father, mother, sister, and others, they slept in woods and swamps by day and traveled throughout the night. Remember, there's no street lights at this time. You're in just the dead of night. Whatever the stars or the moon is showing is all you got to help you, find your way, navigate. But they did this and moved on up through Wilmington, Delaware, helped by a Quaker philanthropist there, moving on ultimately into New York City, where Henry particularly was one of the students of the first school there, New York African Free School number 1. And he had many extraordinary classmates that he studied with, and on this educational process was setting him up for a career in the ministry. He would be there in New York on the day in which the state of New York abolished slavery, July 5th, 1827, and he would really throw himself fully into the abolitionist movement, going to so-called colored conventions where people would have orations and try to all get on the same page as to what to do about this problem of slavery. And in that regards, we publish one of his most eloquent and powerful addresses, Henry Highland Garnet's Address to the Slaves of the United States of America, delivered on August 16, 1843. And we should note its uniqueness. David Walker, right there in Boston, had given a very powerful address. He wrote it, printed it up, would smuggle it in the coats because he was a tailor. He would stuff it in the coats of seamen who would go down south, and when they get down south, they take the little a booklet out, and people would read it. But his was addressed as an appeal to the colored people of the world, free, enslaved, all over the world. This is specifically an address to the slaves of the United States of America. So he's not speaking to the free. He's not speaking to just all over the world. He's specifically saying, here's a message to the enslaved, and as to what to do about this problem of slavery. And I'll just give you a little taste of his. We publish it in entirely. It takes up several pages in the appendix. Brethren, arise. Arise, strike for your lives and liberties. Now is the day and the hour. Let every slave throughout the land do this, and the days of slavery are numbered. You cannot be more oppressed than you have been. You cannot suffer greater cruelties than you have already. Rather die free men than live to be slaves. Remember that you are 4 million. It is in your power so to torment the God-cursed slaveholders that they will be glad to let you go free. If the scale was turned and black men were the masters and white men the slaves, every destructive agent and element would be employed to lay the oppressor low. Danger and death would hang over their heads day and night. Yes, the tyrants would meet with plagues more terrible than those of Pharaoh. But you are a patient people. You act as though you were made for the special use of these devils. You act as though your daughters were born to pamper the lusts of your masters and overseers. And worse than all, you tamely submit while your lords tear your wives from your embraces and defile them before your eyes. In the name of God, we ask, are you in? Where is the blood of your fathers? Has it all run out of your veins? Awake, awake! Millions of voices are calling you. Your dead fathers speak to you from their graves. Heaven, as with the voice of thunder, calls on you to arise from the dust. Let your motto be resistance, resistance, resistance. No oppressed people have ever secured their liberty without resistance. What kind of resistance you had better make, you must decide by the circumstances that surround you, and according to the suggestion of expediency. Brethren, adieu. Trust in the living God. Labor for the peace of the human race, and remember that you are 4 millions. So with that, we're trying to bring these figures back into the discourse. I'm from the state of Texas, where these kinds of speeches and teachings are banned. It's banned that it's unfair to white people to have this kind of thing put in the schools and read and studied, because it makes white people all seem like they were all devils and all oppressors. And again, that's why we're not just all black people in here. We then have 10 white people in here to show that, no, they weren't all devils. And we want to study those who were fighting the devils with us, right? So we know we're coming up against hard times in these days with this kind of teaching. It might not make it into a lot of classrooms down south, but we're still, in other places, but we're still going to push.
It wasn't always easy to get photographs. Paul Jennings was particularly difficult, chapter 2, who wrote a memoir of his time as a valet for James Madison. No one knew, I didn't know anybody black wrote a memoir, first one ever of anybody in the White House. John Stuart Rock, this man, who was a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, and the first one to speak in front of the Supreme Court, and dead at 33, way before anybody would have. He was the person that basically coined black is beautiful. Who knew? And that's why that woman is there, because that's from the first ever Black is Beautiful fashion show in the 1960s, 120 years later. But I want to talk to you about another one of these white people who wasn't a devil. In fact, John Gregg Fee, did I pass him? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did, right there. John Gregg Fee is the founder of Berea College, inspired by Oberlin, the first school in the South to admit black people and women in the 1850s. The pictures on there are of some really significant people and a scene. The scene is from Camp Nelson, when black people ran away from their plantations, contraband they were called, but they were starting to go to school for the first time ever. That's a picture of the people who were in the school with the teachers. But I want to talk to you about the two people above. The one to the right is someone whose name you've heard before, Cassius Clay. You all know who Cassius Clay once was, whose name was abandoned because it was considered his slave name. Ironically, you'll hear in a minute, and he became Muhammad Ali, one of the great men of the 20th and 21st century. That man, that Cassius Clay, is a white man, and Cassius Clay, the black man, briefly, his father, named his son after that guy, because this man was an absolute terror fighting against enslavement. And he came to the aid repeatedly of John Gregg Fee, which is why I had to honor him, also because of the incredible synchronicity of him having that name and Muhammad Ali and everything. But he was undaunted and constantly defiant. The woman to the left, it tells the story of what happened to the college. It started in 1855, accepting blacks and women, and black women. And in 1904, a very racist white man, whose last name was Day, got the legislature of Kentucky to pass the Day Law, and it shut down the admission of black people to Berea College. For 46 years, countless students could have been studying and graduating from Berea. That woman is the first one to graduate in 1954, the same year as Brown versus the Board of Education. And her name is Jessie Reeser Zander. And she became an illustrious alumni, which I found out when I called the college to see about us doing a Zoom with Berea College people. And I told them about her picture. Oh, I had to get permission from the college and her state to use the picture. So I had to do that anyway. There's another round of Eyes on the Prize. Some of you are familiar with the series. Third season. And in one of the episodes, an African-American studies professor from Berea College shows up. So I reached out to him as well. But I found out that she was an undaunted and undyingly loyal alumni of this college that wouldn't let her people in for 46 years. John Gregg Fee was astonishing. He was inspired by his religion, but he went up against many people who were enslavers and religious. And so he was often kicked out of churches, banned from being part of a denomination, and then he went non-denominational, which was the perfect answer because he didn't want to be affiliated with anybody who was an enslaver. So he found the people who were of varied denominations who weren't. And this is what they said about him at the end. This was the day where they were commemorating his contribution to the college. To this day, Berea College serves as a legacy of John G. Fee's hard work, vision, and anti-slavery activism. He was an integrationist who had a vision of an equal and just society that was more than 100 years ahead of its time. Berea College's mission gives equal academic opportunities to individuals of African American and white Appalachian backgrounds throughout the nation, as well as to individuals of other cultural backgrounds from around the world. Fee's message of impartial love and the equality for all people of the world continues to thrive from one generation to the next. One could make the case that it's on hold right now nationally. So we could talk to you about all of the other 16 people easily, because they all deserve statues and they are immensely committed to abolitionism. It is 7:15, and we like to leave a little time to hear from you. So if you have questions or reflections or comments, we can go on if people want more, but we really want to hear from you. Go ahead. Yeah. Please. Oh, Mary Ellen, Pleasant. We're going to wait another minute. We have one more person. Oh, take your question, and then we have.
We're going to turn the lights on in 3, 2, 1. Just don't want to shock anyone. All right, hang on a sec.
Okay, tell us about Mary Ellen. We should have time for both.
On December 2nd, 1859, the day abolitionist John Brown was set to be hanged for leading a daring raid in Virginia, a note was found in his pocket. It read, "The axe is laid at the foot of the tree. When the first blow is struck, there will be more money to help. Signed, M.E.P." There was little doubt that someone with considerable funds and sympathetic to Brown's cause of liberation had written the message to incite and arm an enormous slave uprising, taking over an arsenal at Harper's Ferry. No one suspected that the author of the note was a black woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant. More than 40 years later, when she told the journalist Sam Davis about her life, an amazing story of defiance would emerge. "Before I pass away," Pleasant revealed, "I wish to clear the identity of the party who furnished John Brown with most of his money to start the fight at Harper's Ferry and who signed the letter found on him when he was arrested. It was me." The MEP signature on the note was misread as WEP, and the authorities went searching all around for a white man in the North instead of a Southern woman of color who actually contributed $30,000 to Brown's anti-slavery activity, worth nearly $1 million in today's dollars. She was so beautiful that born of a free, quote, full-blooded negress from Louisiana, and anybody knows me, y'all know both sides of my family, father and mother, are all from Louisiana, and a wealthy Hawaiian planter. She started at a young age as a domestic in Nantucket, Massachusetts. According to her obituary in the New York Times, her experience of living in a Quaker home transformed somehow by Pleasant into a kind of finishing school. There's a mystery about her first husband. So beautiful was she, it's believed a white man became black to be with her. He just left his white identity to go and marry and be with her. It's really not so clear. But her second husband, it's clear, was a black man. Oh, the first husband too left her a sizable inheritance. That was the start of her wealth, of her money, and she was a shrewd businesswoman. Here's what W.E.B. Du Bois would write about her in the book The Gift of Black Folk that he wrote in 1924. He writes, "Pleasant was quite a different kind of woman, and yet strangely effective and influential. Here was a colored woman who became one of the shrewdest business minds of the state. She anticipated the development in oil. She was the trusted confidant of many of the California pioneers, such as Ralston, Mills, and Booth, and for years was a power in San Francisco affairs. Throughout a life that was perhaps more than unconventional, she treasured a bitter hatred for slavery and a certain contempt for white people." I didn't really know, one of the people that I've known that knew about her legacy because she grew up and lived a long time in San Francisco is my great friend and birthmate, Carly Tartikoff. Carly lived out there. She knew the legacy of Mary Ellen. There have been some things named for her. She's kind of regarded as the mother of the civil rights movement in California and San Francisco in particular. And she becomes the subject of a poem by the poet laureate of the nation at one time, Rita Dove, who writes, and I'll end with this, "Mary Ellen Pleasant, wasn't she a voodoo queen? A madam? A mammy? Didn't she run a whorehouse for white businessmen in San Francisco? Wasn't she Mammy Pleasant? Didn't she work voodoo on that white woman and send her off her head? Wasn't she Haitian? Didn't she have a witch mark on her forehead? A cast eye? One blue and one brown eye? Wasn't she ebony, yellow? Wasn't she so pale you'd never know? Didn't she come back as a zombie? Didn't she have a penis? Couldn't she work roots?
Didn't she make a senator's balls fall off? Didn't she set fire to her own house? Never heard of her.
On that note, there's much more to say, but let's hear your comment or question.
Oh, wow.
Well, just a quick comment. I think what you're doing is incredibly important, and so I feel like, of course, we all feel the need to battle against the burying of history, but I feel like so much of the revealing of history is about the history of atrocities, which is incredibly important also, the history of what oppression has done. But I feel like the history of resistance is at least as important and perhaps more important, in that in many ways what motivates us to action, well, yeah, learning the history of what the atrocities can motivate us to action too, but I feel like we get even, in some ways, almost more motivated to action when we hear about the history of resistance. So I'm just very, very appreciative of what you've done.
And also, the movie Sinners is unbelievable and incredibly important for everybody to see who can deal with zombies. And then Straw, amazing film about one woman's struggles against systemic racism. So, other ways to get resistance. Comments or questions, please. Mateo.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from both of you, if you're willing, about how what you learned in the work on this book is informing, whether it's inspiring you, or what wisdom are you holding from this book as you're in the world in this moment?
Whoa. You want to go first? Or should I? To me, the book is telling me everything I want to know and need to know about these times. I've alluded to it a couple times. This is the time to be defiant. Yesterday, I was at an incredible multi-faith event. Jeff was there. I don't know if anybody else was there. 15 religious leaders doing a service and then having a silent vigil throughout Northampton. This is what this book is about, too. I want the book in the world. In fact, we were both asked today, where and how do you want this book to be in the world? And I said, I want college students. I want high school students. And Shabazz had the presence of mind to come up with an activity in his grassroots activism course, which is what this is all about. This is grassroots activism. He asked each of his students to pick one black person and one white person from the book and write questions and observations about them. And this is one person who did it. And I thought these were, the one for Sarah Mapps Douglas was the one I was going to show you. How might her activism been received if she was never affiliated with the Quaker Religious Society of Friends? Despite being a black woman in antebellum America, Douglas did have the privilege of her parents. They were free, and therefore herself being born free from enslavement. While she and her family still faced intense discrimination, Sarah was able to use her privilege to advocate for women's rights and the abolition of slavery. In what ways does Douglas's privilege impact the efficacy of her work? Explain the reasons why this might be the case. Quakerism was an integral part of her upbringing and family. Despite this, she exposed the racism within the Friends. Was this action a risk to her activism, or did it have much effect? Why? I'll stop there. The point being, this is what I want to see happen. I want people to read it and get activated. And it's activated me, the writing of it has activated me to be even more engaged in my community. Because during this time, I, with John and several others, John Berkowitz, formed the Reparation Committee of Northampton, inspired by Michelle Miller and Shabazz and Jeff Gold and Stolen Beam. So there's no end to what we need to be doing right now to resist. This is my R&R beard that I grew right after he was elected the first time. It's supposed to refer to rest and relaxation in the military, retirement and resistance.
Thank you, Tom. Good question, Tia. Tia's written an award-winning new novel called The Untended, and I was up in New Hampshire at a book talk, and we were talking about your work. I think it was up at the bookstore. It was up at Toadstool Books in Petersboro, Massachusetts, and we were, just struck by how powerfully you brought and humanized the life of an addict. And told the story of an addict, and it was like, well, gosh, is she strung out? Has she been an addict? How does she know all this? How can she say all this? And I even felt like the experiences of, for myself, having an older brother, and just seeing the ravages of heroin and coming into the community in the 70s after the Vietnam War. And so it brought so many of the people that I knew growing up who were struggling with addiction. And at that time, we didn't have this view of it being an opioid crisis, and we needed to be, compassionate for those who get caught up in addiction. They were called junkies. They were like human garbage. Nobody wanted to deal with the junkie. And so, you did such a powerful thing there. So I think for me, it's almost like similar in your case. These are just stories we felt have to be told, have to be read and shared and just put out there and see whomever they might spark something in. And that's what we think we are, just kind of channels for maybe things to happen by people hearing these names, reading about these people, and thinking about their lives.
So thanks to both of you. I want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. On one level, did any of these folks know each other or work with each other? And the second part of it is, in your research and writing, did you ever encounter where there were real tensions in strategy, et cetera, amongst the people that you studied and that you brought to life in your book?
The people that were more conventionally abolitionists, they would meet up with each other because there'd be conferences and congresses and different things. So, like Frederick Douglass was very, very aware of Henry Highland Garnet. We chose not to do Frederick Douglass or the Grimke, people that are well known. I did not come across a lot of interactions among the people that we chose. They would interact through a third person, like Abby Foster was an incredibly important influence on Sally Holly and Delia Webster, but they didn't. I don't have any information about them interacting. They lived in really different places, and back in the day, not only was it dark at night, it was pretty isolating in a lot of different ways. I think that I could safely say they might have heard and read about each other in publications, because that was the means of communication. But do I have evidence of it? No. And the second part of your question, in terms of dissonance or divides, there were so many different tactics, and there were critiques of each other's tactics. In the abolition movement, from starting in the 1600s till the Civil War, we did not portray that conflict among these people because we didn't see them interacting with each other. But the Frederick Douglass, Henry Highland Garnet conflict was the stuff of legends, way more so than even the way we come to sometimes see Dr. King and Malcolm X. Henry Highland Garnet's address to the slaves was kind of roundly condemned by Doug. He didn't want it in the world. It was too radical. So there was that. Sarah Parker Ramond, who was another extraordinary story, thrown down a flight of stairs when she showed up at a segregated theater in Boston with a ticket to sit next to her white friend and saying, I don't want to give up my seat. They took her and literally threw her down the stairs. She fought it in a lawsuit and won and integrated the theater. She didn't want to stay here and be advocate. She went to England and spoke out. And there were quite a few people that toured England, Frederick Douglass too, because they wanted to have more likely sympathetic audience and not have to worry about, like Sojourner Truth had to, people coming to crash it who were totally enslavers. So there was that as well. There were those strategies that could differ, places to speak out that could differ, that come across in the book, and tactics that could differ, including, though, there's a whole other thing about the African colonization movement. People wanted to say, yeah, let's have them be free, but get them out of here. Kind of like later on, the Jews in England with the Balfour Declaration. That was why they did that, because they didn't want Jews in England. They didn't want African Americans here. So that was another tactical, huge divide. Do you want to speak to it as well?
I just would add one thing. One through line through many of the people in this book is the question of education, the educating of people of African descent is a through line all through this. And so, and as I teach in one of my classes at UMass, you have to understand the dominant idea and the consensus in this country is that people of African descent were not to be educated. They were either uneducable or it would be dangerous to educate them. It would make them unfit to be enslaved. They would be a problem. You don't want them to be educated. If you've ever read Frederick Douglass's narrative, this is the issue. He goes and he lives in Baltimore, and the wife of the enslaver is educating the young child in the house, and he's there. And so the mistress educates him as well. When the husband comes home, finds out what she's doing, he chastises her. He said, "Oh no, you're crazy. You don't do that." And Douglass is right there. And so they take the alphabet away from him. But his curiosity has been piqued, and he goes out and he challenges little white schoolboys coming home after school, like, "Man, what's that y'all carrying? Oh, that's a book? What is a book? Oh man, y'all couldn't teach me anything, could you?" And they would, and take up the challenge and would begin to share things with him. And he kept going from there and kept going and became able to read. So the view was absolutely a no-no. You have laws passed going as far back in South Carolina after the Stono Rebellion with the so-called Negro Act of 1740 that made it a crime, punishable by fine and imprisonment for someone to teach an African to read. So it's an absolute no-no. And so one of the chapters in here of Anthony Benezet, celebrant of African culture and educator of African American youth, he is going to take over the school in Germantown Academy that Daniel Pastorius ran. So yes, he knew Pastorius. He takes over the school that Daniel Pastorius ran and proceeds to extend education to enslaved and free black students in the evening. And this would be influential with people like Benjamin Franklin, thinking that, education is perhaps a pathway for blacks out of slavery. If we can educate them, if they can learn. David Walker, that we've talked about, big advocate who knew the big advocate for education. So there's definitely a line of connection between many of those. Henry Highland Garnett, he would know of Benezet. He would know of the educational efforts of Anthony Benezet. So there definitely is a connection around those who were able to get education and what they thought, and the whole idea of educating blacks is very much connected amongst many of these people.
And I would just add another one of the divides was about whether black people should go to school with black people or with white people as well. And that comes up in the fight for to integrate schools in Boston in the 1840s. It comes up again big time with Prudence Crandall's school, and Henry Highland Garnett's wife had been at that school in Connecticut. There was a big divide. And it happens up in Canada, because there's a whole section about a woman that went up to Canada, and there were arguments and fights that I've got quotes from. You should not be putting black kids in a white school. They should be by themselves. That's okay, but don't have them mix, and then you'll lose all the supports of the white people for letting you stay in their community. It became an explosive issue. And to this day, we have totally segregated schools.
And not just the segregation. Again, in one of the points Michelle Miller and the folks in Amherst with Reparations for Amherst had brought out was how in our schools today, the number of blacks going on to college, graduating from Amherst Regional High School, at one year was like zero. None of them were going on to college. And yet, the disparity there was just immense. in terms of where most of those graduating that same year were all college bound, but the black students, not a single one college bound. So, you know, it continues all the way up to the present.
And let's end affirmative action so we can keep that trend going.
Oh, boy.
We've run out of time? Accurate? If there's anyone else that wants to offer a reflection or a question, like I said,
Otherwise, we got books for you.
We got to stop.
If you don't have the book yet, we got it.
And we have the book for sale right outside, and we'll sign it as well. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
If you want a book, when you bring it back in, we'll sign it here because there's no place to sit out there. And if you don't, that's okay too. And some people in this room already have the book.